The moment that unlocked Jannik Sinner forever, and almost no one noticed it happening. There are breakthroughs in sport that announce themselves loudly. A championship title, a record broken in front of a packed stadium, a viral moment that travels across every screen on the planet. And then there are the breakthroughs that happen quietly, in a room that wasn't expecting history, during a match that most people forgot to watch. The 2023 Davis Cup semi-final between Italy and Serbia was the second kind. Jannik Sinner was already good. Everybody knew he was good. His technique had been recognized for years. His footwork, his clean ball striking, his baseline consistency, none of it was in question. What was in question, and what had quietly stalked his career like a shadow, was the ability to win when it truly mattered. To close out a match when the moment became enormous. To hold his nerve when the scoreline turned against him and the weight of the occasion pressed down on his chest. He had dropped matches he should have won. He had lost with match points in hand. Against Alcaraz at the 2022 US Open, against Tsitsipas at the 2023 Australian Open, against Altmaier at the 2023 French Open. The talent was never the question. The mind was always the question. Then came Djokovic. Down 0-40, staring at 3 match points against the greatest player the sport has ever produced on the biggest stage in team tennis, Sinner didn't collapse. He saved all 3. He won the match. And from that moment forward, his career was never the same. 2 Grand Slam titles followed in 2024. A streak of dominance carried through 2025 and into 2026 that left the rest of the tour searching for answers. Understanding how that transformation happened and what it means for what is about to unfold in Rome is what this video is about. If you want more analysis like this, stories that go beneath the surface of what you see on the scoreboard, subscribe to Tennis Insider. This is where tennis gets serious. Everyone thinks Sinner was born with a steel mind. The truth is almost the opposite. Here is the most common misconception about Jannik Sinner in 2026. That his composure is innate. That his ability to control a tiebreak under extreme pressure, to win a crucial breakpoint without flinching, to walk back to the baseline after an error as if nothing happened, is simply who he is. A natural, a born closer. Watch him now and it's easy to believe that. But belief and history are different things. The historical record tells a different story. The Sinner who existed before November 2023 was a player defined, at least in part, by the matches he couldn't finish. Not because he wasn't talented enough, not because his game broke down under pressure, but because when the decisive moment arrived, something inside him couldn't fully commit. He blinked. He hesitated in the places where hesitation costs everything. It happened enough times against enough different opponents that it wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern, a psychological ceiling that his technique alone couldn't break through. This is the critical distinction that separates Sinner's story from a simple talent narrative. The talent existed before Davis Cup 2023. The belief, the deep, unshakable conviction that he could close out any match against any opponent on any stage, came after. That single match didn't create his skill. It unlocked his mind. And in elite sport, once that door opens, everything changes. The Sinner who walked off that Davis Cup court was fundamentally different from the one who had walked on. Not physically, not technically, psychologically, permanently. And that is precisely why, in 2026, he is the most dominant player in men's tennis.
5 consecutive Masters, 1,000 titles, an unbeaten run since February. And he says he's exhausted. Let's be clear about what Jannik Sinner is walking into at Rome 2026, because the numbers alone don't capture the full weight of it. He arrives with an unbeaten streak stretching back to February, 5 consecutive Masters 1,000 titles, a win rate over his last 30 sets that borders on statistical absurdity. By any objective measure, he is not just the best player in the world. He is one of the most dominant players the sport has seen since the Federer, Nadal, Djokovic era defined the landscape for 2 decades. And yet, in the days before the tournament, Sinner said something that most people glossed over. He said he was exhausted. Not a little tired. Not the standard diplomatic, "I need some rest." He said it plainly, with the kind of directness that usually signals a player who knows exactly what his body is telling him. 5 tournaments in a row at the highest level. The physical demands alone would tax any athlete. The mental demands of maintaining focus, managing expectations, processing the weight of being the undisputed #1 in a sport that constantly wants to test you, add another layer entirely. And Rome is not just another Masters 1000. For Sinner, this tournament carries 4 specific burdens simultaneously. The chance to win his career Golden Masters, the chance to break the record for consecutive Masters 1000 victories, the chance to end Italy's 50-year drought in their own capital, and the pressure that comes from being the only remaining favorite after Carlos Alcaraz's withdrawal. Every unit of expectation that would have been distributed across 2 players is now sitting entirely on one pair of shoulders, his. The myth that almost everyone believes about Sinner, and why it's wrong. If you watch Jannik Sinner play in 2026, really watch him with attention, you will notice something that seems extraordinary. He doesn't panic. Not when he's down a break. Not when he's facing a tie-break in a deciding set. Not when he makes an unforced error at the worst possible moment. He just resets, takes a breath, plays the next point. It looks effortless. It looks natural. And that is the trap, because it isn't natural at all. It's constructed. And here is the argument that sounds perfectly logical but falls apart under scrutiny. That Sinner is a clutch player by nature, born to perform in big moments. Some players have it, some don't, and Sinner simply happens to have it. This is wrong. It's wrong not because it misidentifies his current capability. He absolutely is a clutch performer now, but because it mistakes the destination for the journey. What looks like innate composure is actually earned composure. It was built through failure, through match points lost, through sets thrown away when he had the match in hand and something inside him couldn't hold on. The composure you see in 2026 is not the same thing that existed in 2021 or 2022. It is the product of a specific transformation triggered by a specific moment. And understanding that distinction matters enormously if you want to understand what kind of champion Jannik Sinner actually is. Champions who were born clutch are interesting. Champions who built it from the ruins of their own failures are something else entirely. They understand it, they own it, and they don't lose it again. Never write off Novak Djokovic, especially not at Rome, especially not like this. Here is the argument that feels completely logical going into Rome 2026. Novak Djokovic is 38 years old, has been out for 6 weeks with an injury, has dropped out of the top 10, and is returning to competition as the furthest thing from a favorite.
Statistically, empirically, objectively, he shouldn't be a serious contender. And that argument is wrong. It has been wrong every single time it has been made about Djokovic for the last 4 years. Every time the consensus coalesced around the idea that the decline was permanent, that the age had caught up, that the era was finally over, he showed up and won something. The rankings tell you about match points accumulated over a rolling 52-week window. They do not tell you about what happens when Novak Djokovic walks onto the clay at Foro Italico, a court where he has won 6 titles, where he knows the bounce of the ball in the afternoon heat, where he understands the wind patterns across the different courts, where 38 years of accumulated tennis intelligence is worth more than the rankings suggest. His physical peak may have passed, his tactical peak has not. His serve construction, his ability to build a point across multiple exchanges on clay, his understanding of when to take time away from an opponent and when to accelerate, none of those things erode at 38. They mature. And his 6-week absence wasn't random recovery, it was deliberate preparation. He chose Rome, specifically. That choice alone tells you something about where his mind is. What happened in the Australian Open final tells you everything about how Sinner thinks under pressure. The 2024 Australian Open final between Jannik Sinner and Daniil Medvedev is one of the most instructive matches in recent tennis history, not because of the result, but because of the psychological architecture of how Sinner won it. He lost the first 2 sets in a Grand Slam final against one of the most mentally durable players of his generation. At this point, the version of Sinner who existed before November 2023 would have struggled. Not necessarily collapsed, but struggled. The weight of the moment, the size of the deficit, the awareness that no one had ever come back from 2 sets down to win a Grand Slam final before at that level of competition, all of it would have pressed. What Sinner did instead was something that revealed a fundamental shift in how he processed adversity. He didn't try to win the match on the next point. He didn't accelerate into panic, didn't overplay to force the issue, didn't chase the momentum he'd lost. He read the situation with a clarity that should not be possible under that kind of pressure. He recognized that Medvedev had been physically depleted by multiple 5-set matches in the preceding rounds. He chose patience over urgency. He increased the physical demands of the rallies gradually, extended exchanges, pushed Medvedev into the territory where exhaustion becomes the decisive factor. He turned a deficit into a strategy. That's not resilience, that's intelligence, the kind that only exists in a player who has stopped being afraid of losing and started being focused entirely on what it takes to win. The paradox at Rome 2026. The harder Sinner tries, the more dangerous the trap becomes. There is a specific kind of pressure that is more dangerous than ordinary pressure. Ordinary pressure comes from the fear of failure. You don't want to lose, you try hard not to lose, and sometimes the trying gets in the way of the playing. This is the standard version of what sports psychology calls performance anxiety, and it's what derailed Sinner in his early career. But there is another kind of pressure, rarer and in some ways more treacherous, that comes not from the fear of failure, but from the weight of inevitability. When the expectation is not just that you might win, but that you must. When the entire emotional investment of a nation, a generation, and a historical timeline rests on a single outcome.
When there is no scenario in which anything other than victory feels acceptable. That is what Sinner faces in Rome 2026, and it is genuinely different from anything he has navigated before. At the Grand Slams, he was chasing the peak. The pressure was directional, upward, aspiring. At Rome, the pressure is gravitational. It pulls down. Italy's last winner in Rome was Adriano Panatta in 1976, 50 years ago. Alcaraz is absent. The draw has opened. The narrative has been written. All that remains is execution. And the cruelest truth about sport is that the moments where everything aligns perfectly for you to win are often the moments where winning is hardest, because the awareness of what you stand to lose transforms the act of playing. The player in Sinner's draw, who might be the most dangerous person in the entire tournament, Jakub Mensik, is 19 years old. He is ranked inside the top 20. He plays with a kind of uninhibited aggression that belongs to a player who hasn't yet learned to be afraid of big moments, because he hasn't had enough of them to understand what he's supposed to fear. And in the 3rd round of Rome 2026, he is scheduled to face Jannik Sinner. Let that sit for a moment. One of only 2 players to have beaten Sinner in the entirety of 2026, a player who defeated him in February with an attacking, fearless brand of tennis that gave the number 1 no time to breathe, is positioned in his draw at exactly the moment when Sinner's physical reserves are at their lowest point of the season. This is not a coincidence the draw should be blamed for. This is simply how the tournament bracket fell. But the collision it sets up is one of the most genuinely unpredictable matchups in the draw. The conventional logic says Sinner, even exhausted, beats a 19-year-old in the 3rd round of a Masters 1000. The historical record says Mensik already did it once, recently, on a faster surface when Sinner was fresher. The psychological dynamic is fascinating. A dominant champion carrying the weight of historic expectation against an emerging player with nothing to lose and a proven ability to win. In elite sport, nothing to lose is not a weakness. It is one of the most powerful positions a player can occupy. The 5 mental models that separate the best players in the world from everyone else. Watching Sinner and Djokovic operate at the level they do, you begin to see patterns that repeat across their most important victories. 5 of them stand out clearly. The first is the primacy of psychological breakthrough over physical improvement. At the highest levels of tennis, the physical differences between the top players are marginal. What separates them is the mind, specifically the ability to hold belief in moments of crisis. Sinner's Davis Cup match wasn't a physical revelation, it was a mental one that unlocked everything that followed. The second is continuous evolution even from the top. Sinner changed his serve twice in 3 years. He studied Alcaraz's drop shot and integrated it into his own game. The player who stays static, even at number 1, eventually becomes predictable. The third is absolute composure under pressure, not as a personality trait, but as a practice discipline. The ability to return to process after error, to take 1 point at a time when the match is on the line, to not let the size of the moment change the quality of the decision-making. The fourth is strategic patience, the capacity to read an opponent's physical state and adjust the plan accordingly, the way Sinner did against Medvedev, using endurance as a weapon rather than urgency. And the fifth, most relevant to Djokovic at 38, is environmental and tactical mastery.
When the body can no longer produce everything the situation demands, experience compensates. Knowledge of the court, the conditions, the opponent's tendencies, the precise moment to change pace, these things don't decline with age, they compound. Rome 2026 is not just a tennis tournament, it's a test of everything we thought we knew about dominance. Here is the final question that Rome 2026 poses, and it's a bigger question than who wins the title. The question is whether what we're watching in Jannik Sinner represents a new template for sustained dominance in men's tennis, or whether it reveals its limits at exactly the moment when the pressure is most extreme. The evidence for Sinner's dominance is overwhelming. 5 consecutive Masters 1000 titles, an unbeaten streak across months, a level of technical completeness, serve, backhand, forehand, drop shot, mental reset after error, that no player on the tour can fully match. The evidence for the fragility of that dominance is quieter but real. A body that has been pushed through 5 consecutive elite tournaments, a 19-year-old in the draw who has already beaten him once, a former 6-time Rome champion who chose this specific tournament to return from injury, and a weight of national expectation that has no precedent in Sinner's career. What makes Rome extraordinary is not that it will produce a champion. Every tournament produces a champion. What makes it extraordinary is the collision of forces it has assembled. The dominant player carrying physical limits and historic pressure. The legend returning on his best surface with nothing to prove and everything to gain. The fearless young challenger with the most dangerous credential possible, a recent win over the favorite. Tennis rarely constructs its dramas this deliberately. Most of the time, the sport just plays. This time, it feels like the sport is asking a question, and it will answer it one way or another on the clay of Foro Italico. For more breakdowns like this, analysis that treats tennis as the sport it actually is, not the sport the highlights pretend it is, subscribe to Tennis Insider. We go deeper so you see more.